Good evening. I'm Robert. Welcome back to another edition of the High Deseret Ranch channel, and this is Truck Talk. And I try and keep these not super frequent, but every once in a while I've got to talk about a few things, and I try not to be politicky or political, because there's plenty of other channels that talk about that kind of stuff. But there is certain things that I like to talk about, and when it relates to agriculture and how that affects the working man. But it's one of those things of Abigail Adams, the wife of John Adams, said, when I reach for a flour or sugar in the cupboard and it's not there, that's politics. When there's an increase in price because of inflation on the wood soap for the floor, that's politics. And she brings up a great point, because sooner or later politics does affect the average day working man. And as I think about those that are hardworking here in America and across the world, but specifically here in America, those that are just, whatever, you're a blue collar or you're a rancher or farmer, you're working hard every single day to put food on the table, not only for yourself but for others. And so, at the end of a long day, finish up with chores, feeding up the animals. Just hauled some lumber from a good dear friend, some rough cut lumber, so I can build a place to milk a cow and to have a large chicken coop, things of that nature. This would just have been on my mind, and it's something that I've searched for it. It kind of was a bleep in the crazy news cycle of things, but it's something that it needs to be talked about, because it's sooner or later going to affect folks here, not only worldwide but specifically America. America's always been the target for the globalist, whatever movement you want to call it, communism, one world government, new world order. America has always been the strong animal, because of its founding. There's a huge advancement in technology, obviously freedom, personal liberty, with the foundation and establishment of America under a constitutional republic. And so our neighbors to the north, Canada, it's a country of 30 million people, less population than California or Texas, not even combined, but smaller populations in those two states here. And yet something has already happened up there, and I've always noticed that Canada's kind of a few years ahead of America. Europe is 15, 20 years ahead. Canada is more like 5 to 10 in front of the U.S. And so something that was announced by the Catholic Church that I know is going to affect everybody in one way or another. And it was announced on the 31st of this year, March 31st, and that was the doctrine of discovery. And if you're not familiar with that, you might want to do a little research. I don't have time to go into it here, but the doctrine of discovery was renounced by the Catholic Church. And in a nutshell, and again, nothing against Catholics, but the doctrine of discovery relates to the fact that it's close to 500 years old. And as European explorers came over throughout the entire world, but specifically, I'm going to talk specifically about here in America, using the doctrine of discovery to claim ownership of lands and things of that nature. And one thing leads to another as more and more Europeans came over here. Obviously, there's conflict with the native populations here, not only in America, but Mexico and up in Canada too. Again, not going to even touch that. There's atrocities on both sides, and even atrocities within native tribes before European explorers even got here. And that's something that's not really talked about in our revisionist history, is they weren't as peaceful as they're made out to be. Not excusing the atrocities that were committed by European settlers, but it goes both ways. In conflicts, there's slave trade going on within the own native tribes, things of that nature. And so anyways, so the Catholic Church renounced that, and the thing that's important about that is, and again, I've got to be very high level and kind of move along this quickly, again, giving you food for thought for you to go do your own homework. And so I'll hit on those things that's going to be important to this massive, what I feel and I know to be a massive land grab, is you have to keep in mind that wherever you are at in the country, especially if you're Midwest or back east, basically east of the Rocky Mountains, there's very little percentage of federally owned land. I live here in the mountains of central Utah. A lot of these western states, Wyoming, Colorado, but especially like Nevada and Utah, Utah's like 70% owned by the land is owned by the federal government. And Nevada, it's the same. It's the top. We're like number 2 right behind Nevada. But then you have like Arizona, New Mexico, Wyoming, Colorado, and Idaho. And where you live back east in like New England area, Vermont, and those places it's like 3% of the total land area of a state is owned by the federal government, which again, whether it's the 3% or like here in Utah pushing 70%, Nevada, it's over 70% of the total acreage is owned by the federal government. That's completely unconstitutional. There's the sections outlined in the Constitution that says what the government can and cannot hold. 70% of a total state's acreage, land, cannot be owned by the federal government. So right there, you're already like flawed, skewed. But when you look at the overall grand scheme of things, I did a truck talk. It's Biden's 30 for 30. He signed an executive order that by the year 2030, 30% of the total land of the United States, 30% of the water and land would be put into conservation easement, which even though Utah's like in Nevada are close like 70, right around 70%, the overall United States is not at 30%. And so I believe in what is already starting to happen up in Canada is going to happen here. At least they're trying to push for it. It started under the Bush. They didn't really actually go along with this UN mandate or resolution, whatever you want to call it, this UN agenda. They said no. But under Biden, under Obama, those 8 years, he was all for that kind of thing. And then it kind of slowed underneath Trump, and then Biden has just ramped it up to make the 8 years of Obama look like nothing as it relates to this doctrine of discovery. And so, again, it all goes back to that Agenda 2030, Biden's 30% by 2030 kind of a thing. And so essentially you have a country of 330 million people, but you have 3 million indigenous Native Americans here. Yet there's been a huge push in the last few years, and I haven't really been able to understand why, but the timing of this whole renouncement of the doctrine of discovery by the Catholic Church might have huge implications. Now, mind you, this happened hundreds of years, these European explorers, before the United States became a country. We have things called national sovereignty, a constitution that separates us from a global agenda or global powers, but hasn't and it isn't stopping those on a global level from doing what they think is best for what they see fit to happen. So what's interesting is under the Biden administration, they said they want to, and they have nominated judges who not only understand tribal law, but tribal lands, heritage, things of that nature. And that doesn't sound like a bad thing, but I'll get into that really quick. That under the appointed, there's been 52 key positions in the Department of Interior, again, another unconstitutional agency that have been appointed to help carry out these things. And the big push for is under Obama, there were 77 executive orders. Again, all executive orders are unconstitutional. They have been since the beginning of the first executive orders. So under the 8 years of Obama, there's 77 executive orders signed. Trump, there was only 19. In just the 2 years of Biden, there's been over 70 that relates to tribal lands. And again, if any of you are watching this that are Native Americans, if you've learned one thing, is do not trust the government when it comes to treaties. You've been pushed onto these reservations, which have just led to appalling conditions economically, socially, mentally, emotionally, everything. That blueprint is not good for the rest of America. But what the government is trying to do, and I feel, and based upon past experience, i.e. reservations, these Indian reservations, is the government is trying to create these treaties and strengthen these treaties to the Department of Interior and some of these Native American judges to basically get these trusts created where they lock in more land, more tribal land under the auspices of preservation and cultural things of that nature. But again, once you lock in something for 30, under this 30 for 30 plan, and I can account for it. There's been times where stuff happens on federal land, and you get these crazy bureaucrats. They won't even allow like airlift choppers to go in and rescue people. They've got to truck these people out on foot, on stretchers, off of this federal land. It's getting absolutely insane where the land is literally held hostage. Millions of acres of mineral rights, resources, timber, water's completely off limits out here in the West. It's crazy. And so it's the same thing where they're making it sound like it's great to help out these tribes, but you go and ask and talk to some of these tribal members, they're not seeing the benefits of anything. They haven't. There's been hundreds of billions of dollars poured into the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and for what ends? What of the actual these people who live on these in the reservations? Which, when you look at some of these reservations, they're the poorest areas in this entire country, and so already to date, there's been over 500,000 acres put into these trusts on tribal lands alone. And really, to keep this short, is back in 2013, you'll remember that, or maybe not, that the USDA started the conservation program. And this is kind of leading into this whole, eventually Obama or Biden's 30 for 30. The USDA said, we want to be able to put more land in conservation, but then when you look at the fine print, you're not the owner of it anymore. You might have signed away for a little bit of money, it's the a pittance for the mess of porridge. But when you read some of this fine print stuff, it says the U.S. or successor of the U.S. Has ownership of this property. So again, there's always strings attached with one of these things. And so folks, what you need to understand is they've already passed up in, I'm trying to remember what it was up in Canada that they passed. It's, I wish I could remember. I'm trying to remember what it is. I think it's like the C-15 Canada bill. And basically it goes along with this UN declaration, and where basically it doesn't matter your land or how long you've owned the land as a family, that you need to give it back to these native Indian tribes as part of this UN resolution. And so what's interesting about that is, that's why this video about the farmland that's going to be seized, is it's already starting to create problems. So they're starting to roll out this program up in Canada where farmers have been farming, they're 5th, 6th generation farmers. And you look at the amount of lands that have been locked up federally, and the amount of some of these tribal lands, like up in the Dakotas, even in Utah, Nevada, way down into like the Great Plains area down in Texas, and east of the Mississippi. Some of these old tribal lands, that's when the government says, yep, it doesn't matter, Farmer Joe or Robert, your family land that you're now 5th generation, we're reclaiming that for the Ute tribe, or for the Sioux, or the Cherokee, or whatever it may be. And then they're just going to, like what they're starting to do up in Canada, is then partner with these tribes under the auspices of, oh, we're here to help, which, when someone's from the government that said they're here to help, they're not really there to help. There's always a different agenda. You always watch what the other hand's doing, not what this one is going to be doing. And so this, again, part of the whole 30 for 30, how else are they going to accomplish getting, the 10% or whatever it is, all the way up to 30% across the board? And a lot of that has to happen back east. It's, but the scary part is for the 30%, like here in the state of Utah, Nevada, that isn't owned by the federal government, that they can possibly use this towards renouncing privately owned land by farmers for 5 generations, under the auspices of giving it back to the tribes, but then basically forcing the tribes to go into some huge land trust, is through this doctrine of discovery, which, again, I don't agree with, completely unconstitutional. One thing I do hope is that the federal government doesn't even have that power to give away our sovereignty. Under the Constitution, each state is sovereign. 50 states, 50 governors. And so it's very important. Elections do have consequences, that exactly what's happening within the state level, the governors that hopefully aren't bought and sold to go along with this this agenda, whatever the agenda might be. I don't care what it's being called, that it's constantly changing, but the end goals are still the same. So Anyways, I hope this video was a nice stepping stone, a launch pad, so to speak. Please check out the other Truck Talk videos that unfortunately have aged not well or very well, depending on your outlook. They've aged well, so to speak, as far as being factual and truthful, but I wish they wouldn't age well. So anyways, I'm gonna get inside. I've got supper on the stove, but I just wanted to go ahead and give this to you, that of course no one in the corporate owned media is talking about this. You've got to really dig to some of these alternative news medias and news sources such as myself, but go ahead and look at that, do your searches for yourself, and leave your comments below to see if you've already heard rumblings of this happening in a state near you. I know they've already had some problems up in Wisconsin, but for the High Deseret Ranch channel, this is Robert, and join me next time.